What are you? You are a collection of atoms, a symphony of electrical signals firing through a complex network of neurons. But that doesn't quite capture it, does it? There is something else. There is the experience of being you. You see the color red. You feel the warmth of the sun on your skin. You experience the bitter sting of regret or the soaring height of joy. This inner world, this subjective reality, is what we call consciousness. It is perhaps the most profound and persistent mystery known to science. We have mapped the human genome, we have peered into the farthest reaches of the cosmos, but the nature of our own awareness remains stubbornly elusive, a ghost in the machine of our own biology. Scientists and philosophers have grappled with this problem for centuries, a puzzle so fundamental it has been dubbed the hard problem of consciousness. The easy problems, relatively speaking, involve explaining how the brain processes information, how it focuses attention, or how it controls behavior. But explaining why any of this physical processing should be accompanied by subjective experience, why it feels like something to be alive, is a challenge of a completely different order. Classical physics, the physics of Isaac Newton that governs our everyday world of falling apples and orbiting planets, provides no answer. It describes a world of objects and forces, a clockwork universe that seems to have no room for subjective experience. From a classical perspective, you are just an incredibly complex biological machine. But no matter how complex the machine, why isn't it all just happening in the dark, without any inner awareness? This is the chasm that modern science is still trying to cross. This profound mystery has pushed some thinkers to look for answers in a very strange place. Not in biology alone, not in chemistry, but in the most fundamental and bizarre description of reality we have ever conceived. They are looking to the world of the very small, the realm of atoms and subatomic particles. A world where the familiar rules of our reality break down completely. They are asking a radical question. What if the secret to consciousness isn't found in the large-scale mechanics of the brain, but in the weird, probabilistic, and frankly spooky world of quantum mechanics? This journey began in the early 20th century, when physicists studying light and atoms kept finding results that made no sense according to classical physics. They discovered that energy wasn't continuous, like a smooth ramp, but came in discrete packets, or quanta. It led to the understanding that particles like electrons could also behave like waves, spreading out in space like ripples on a pond, a concept known as wave-particle duality. Because a particle can act like a wave, it can exist in multiple states or locations simultaneously. An electron orbiting an atom isn't in one neat little orbit. It exists in a probability cloud of all the places it could be. Another mind-bending feature of the quantum world is called entanglement. Albert Einstein famously called it spooky action at a distance because he found it so unsettling. When particles become entangled, they are no longer independent entities, but are described by a single shared quantum state. No matter how far apart you separate them, whether they are in the same lab or on opposite sides of the galaxy, they remain linked. It's as if they are two magic coins that, when flipped, always land on opposite faces, regardless of the distance between them. Then there is the phenomenon of quantum tunneling. In the classical world, if you don't have enough energy to get over a barrier, you simply can't. But in the quantum world, this is exactly what can happen. Thanks to its wave-like nature, a particle has a small but non-zero probability of simply tunneling through an energy barrier it shouldn't be able to cross. This seemingly impossible feat is not just a theoretical curiosity. It's a real phenomenon that makes modern technology possible. Quantum tunneling is essential for how our sun generates energy through nuclear fusion. Perhaps the most philosophically challenging aspect of quantum mechanics is the role of measurement, or observation. Before a measurement, a quantum system exists in a superposition of all its possible states, described by a mathematical entity called the wave function. However, the moment you perform a measurement, the moment you look at the particle to see where it is or what its spin is, something dramatic happens. The wave function instantaneously collapses. This is the infamous measurement problem, and it lies at the heart of the debate about what quantum mechanics truly means. What counts as a measurement? Does it require a conscious observer? In classical physics, the observer is a passive bystander, simply recording a reality that exists independently of them. But in quantum mechanics, the act of observation seems to play an active, participatory role in creating the reality that is observed. This apparent link between measurement and reality has led some to speculate that consciousness itself might be the thing that causes the wave function to collapse, that our subjective awareness is what turns quantum possibilities into actualities. Quantum mechanics presents us with a world that is probabilistic, interconnected, and seemingly influenced by observation. It describes a reality that is not fixed and solid, but is a dynamic dance of potential and actuality. The idea that the strange rules of the quantum world might have something to do with the equally strange nature of the mind is not a new one. It stretches back almost to the very birth of quantum mechanics itself. The founding fathers of the theory, brilliant minds like Niels Bohr, Werner Heisenberg, and Erwin Schrödinger, were not just physicists. They were also deep philosophical thinkers. They were profoundly struck by the bizarre implications of their own discoveries. For instance, the concept of complementarity, championed by Niels Bohr, suggests that a quantum object can have properties that are mutually exclusive, like being both a wave and a particle, and you can only observe one aspect at a time. Some thinkers saw a reflection of this in human psychology. Erwin Schrödinger, famous for his thought experiment with the simultaneously alive and dead cat, explicitly speculated about the connection. He wrote a book in 1944 called What is Life, where he argued that the stability of genetic information in living organisms might rely on quantum mechanical principles. He suggested that the molecules of heredity must be aperiodic crystals, structures that were stable enough to carry a code, a stability he attributed to quantum mechanics. While he did not explicitly formulate a theory of quantum consciousness, he helped plant the seed of an idea. They saw that quantum mechanics had shattered the simple materialistic view of the universe, and in doing so it opened up a conceptual space where something as non-physical and strange as consciousness might find a home. For decades after the initial musings of its founders, the idea of a quantum mind remained largely on the fringes of scientific thought. Mainstream neuroscience focused, quite successfully, on a classical model of the brain. In this view, neurons are like biological transistors, and the brain is essentially a very complex, wet, classical computer. However, this classical computer model of the brain has struggled to fully account for some of the most profound aspects of consciousness. It has a hard time explaining the binding problem, how information processed in different parts of the brain is unified into a single, seamless experience. This dissatisfaction led a new generation of scientists to revisit the quantum connection, not as a philosophical analogy, but as a testable scientific hypothesis. The most famous and detailed proposal for a quantum mind came in the 1990s from an unlikely partnership. Sir Roger Penrose, a distinguished mathematical physicist from the University of Oxford, and Stuart Hameroff, an anesthesiologist from the University of Arizona, joined forces to create the orchestrated objective reduction, or OR theory. Penrose had already argued from a purely mathematical standpoint that human consciousness must be non-computable, meaning it could not be simulated by a classical computer. He believed our ability to have mathematical insights and understand things in a flash of aha went beyond any formal algorithm. This is where Stuart Hameroff came in. As an anesthesiologist, he was fascinated by how different anesthetic gases could switch off consciousness while leaving other brain functions intact. He noticed that these gases seemed to act on tiny, protein-based structures inside neurons called microtubules. Hameroff proposed that these microtubules were the perfect candidates for hosting quantum computation in the brain. He suggested that electrons within the tubulin proteins that make up the microtubule lattice could enter into a large-scale quantum superposition, acting as qubits. Together, Penrose and Hameroff created the OR theory. In their model, quantum computations begin in the microtubules within the brain's neurons. These computations build up, with tubulin qubits becoming entangled across many neurons. When the superposition reaches a critical threshold defined by Penrose's objective reduction, it collapses spontaneously. This collapse, this moment of objective reduction, creates a moment of conscious experience, or qualia. In this view, consciousness isn't continuous, but is a sequence of discrete events, a symphony of quantum collapses happening billions of times per second, all orchestrated within the microtubules of the brain. One of the most powerful arguments for exploring quantum consciousness stems from a deep dissatisfaction with the prevailing model of the brain as a classical computer. Proponents of quantum theories argue that the brain as computer metaphor, while useful, ultimately falls short in explaining the most cherished aspects of our mental lives. Consider the aha moment, that sudden flash of understanding where a solution to a complex problem appears in your mind, seemingly out of nowhere. Mathematical physicist Roger Penrose argues that these moments of non-algorithmic insight are a key piece of evidence. Furthermore, there is the sheer speed and power of the brain to consider. Could this incredible computational power be a sign that the brain is leveraging the quantum principle of superposition? A quantum computer, by holding many possibilities in superposition at once, can explore a vast problem space simultaneously. Finally, the classical model struggles profoundly with the binding problem. Our conscious experience is seamlessly unified. When you see a bouncing red ball, you don't experience redness, roundness, and bouncing motion as separate data streams. They are all integrated into the single, coherent experience of a bouncing red ball. Quantum entanglement offers a tantalizing, if speculative, solution. If the neurons processing these different features were quantumly entangled, they would form an indivisible whole, their states instantly correlated regardless of their physical separation in the brain. This could provide a physical mechanism for the unified nature of conscious experience. A major hurdle for quantum mind theories has always been the argument that the brain is just too warm, wet, and noisy for delicate quantum effects to survive. However, a new and exciting field called quantum biology is rapidly changing this perception. Scientists are now discovering that many fundamental biological processes actually appear to rely on quantum phenomena. One of the most well-established examples is photosynthesis, the process by which plants convert sunlight into energy. When a photon of light strikes a chlorophyll molecule, it creates a packet of energy called an exciton. Instead of stumbling through the molecular network, quantum mechanics allows the exciton to enter a superposition, exploring all possible paths simultaneously and instantly finding the most efficient route. Another stunning example comes from the animal kingdom, the magnetic sense of birds like the European robin. The leading theory suggests this sense is quantum-powered. A light-triggered chemical reaction in the bird's eye creates a pair of molecules with entangled electrons, creating a visual pattern that is essentially a map of the magnetic field. These examples demonstrate a crucial point. Evolution has had billions of years to experiment with the laws of physics. If quantum effects can provide a competitive advantage, it's plausible, maybe even likely, that life would have found a way to harness them. This emerging field of quantum biology really dismantles the primary objection to quantum consciousness. It proves that nature can and does protect and exploit quantum coherence in biological systems that are just as warm and wet as the human brain. If a plant can use quantum superposition for energy and a bird can use entanglement for navigation, then the idea that the brain might use them for consciousness suddenly seems far less outlandish. Perhaps the most compelling argument for quantum consciousness is its potential to address the hard problem, the mystery of why physical processes should generate subjective experience at all. Classical physics describes a world of objects, forces, and information. But there is nothing in its equations that predicts the existence of qualia, the raw feel of experience. Quantum mind theories offer a way to ground this idea in actual physics. They suggest that consciousness is not an emergent property of complexity, but an intrinsic property of a specific physical process, the collapse of the wave function. In the Occam theory, for example, each moment of objective reduction, each collapse, is a moment of conscious experience. In this view, the proto-conscious qualia, the fundamental ingredients of experience, are woven into the fabric of the universe itself. The collapse of a quantum superposition simply selects a particular set of these proto-conscious moments, creating a rich and complex conscious experience. This perspective aligns with the holistic and non-local nature of both quantum mechanics and consciousness. As we discussed, our conscious experience feels like an indivisible whole. Similarly, quantum systems, especially when they're entangled, exhibit a profound holism. Quantum mind theories propose that this is not just an analogy. They suggest that the unity of consciousness is a direct reflection of the physical unity of an underlying, large-scale entangled quantum state in the brain. The I that experiences the world is the macroscopic quantum object. Ultimately, the argument is one of explanatory power. While classical neuroscience can map the correlates of consciousness, it remains silent on its origin and nature. Quantum theories, for all their speculative nature, at least attempt to build that bridge. The most significant and widely cited argument against quantum consciousness theories is a formidable physical obstacle known as quantum decoherence. The strange and powerful effects of the quantum world, like superposition and entanglement, are incredibly fragile. They can only survive in a state of near-perfect isolation from the surrounding environment. The brain, critics argue, is perhaps the worst possible place in the universe to try and maintain such a delicate quantum dance. It's warm, wet, and relentlessly noisy, a chaotic storm of electrical and chemical activity. Physicists who are skeptical of theories like Occam have performed calculations to estimate how long a quantum state could possibly survive within a structure like a microtubule. Physicist Max Tegmark, for instance, calculated that the timescale for decoherence in the warm, wet environment of the brain would be on the order of femtoseconds or even attoseconds. That's a millionth of a billionth of a second, an astonishingly short period of time. For a quantum state to perform any meaningful computation relevant to thought or perception, which happens on the timescale of milliseconds, it would need to remain coherent for a duration trillions of times longer than these calculations suggest is possible. This decoherence problem represents a fundamental challenge that quantum mind theories must overcome. The default assumption for most physicists is that, on the scale of a neuron, and certainly over the time scale of conscious thought, the brain behaves as an entirely classical system. Without a convincing solution to the decoherence problem, many scientists view the entire quantum consciousness enterprise as being built on a foundation of sand. Beyond the daunting physical challenges, many neuroscientists raise a more biological objection. There is simply no direct evidence for quantum computation happening in the brain. The dominant and highly successful model in neuroscience is the Hodgkin-Huxley model, which describes neurons as classical electrical circuits. This model beautifully explains how action potentials, the electrical spikes that are the basis of neural communication, are generated and propagated. It treats ion channels, synapses, and neurotransmitters using classical physics and chemistry, and it has been incredibly predictive. Neuroscientists argue that if quantum processes were central to consciousness, we should expect to find some evidence of them in our experiments. For example, if consciousness were a sequence of discrete quantum collapses, as Occam suggests, we might expect to see its signature in EEG recordings. Furthermore, the specific biological claims of theories like Occam have faced intense scrutiny. The theory places microtubules at the center of consciousness, but microtubules are found in nearly all eukaryotic cells, including those in plants and simple organisms that are not considered conscious. They are also critical for cell division, a process that continues even under general anesthesia when consciousness is absent. Critics argue that this makes microtubules an unlikely candidate for the unique physical substrate of subjective experience. The burden of proof, neuroscientists argue, lies with the quantum proponents. They must provide concrete, testable evidence that something beyond classical neurophysiology is at play. Finally, many critics of quantum consciousness appeal to a fundamental principle of scientific reasoning: Occam's razor. This principle states that when faced with competing explanations for a phenomenon, one should select the one that makes the fewest new assumptions. The theory that consciousness emerges from the complex classical computation of the brain's neural network is already grounded in known biology and physics. It doesn't require us to invent new mechanisms or posit that the brain has solved problems, like shielding decoherence, that have stumped our best physicists. In stark contrast, quantum mind theories require a whole series of extraordinary and unproven assumptions. One must assume that the brain contains structures capable of acting as qubits. One must assume that these structures can initiate and maintain quantum coherence for computationally relevant timescales. This argument suggests that quantum consciousness theories are not just physically and biologically implausible, but also philosophically unparsimonious. They are an attempt to explain one mystery, consciousness, with another, even greater mystery, the measurement problem in quantum mechanics. Critics argue that we should first exhaust all the possibilities within the more established framework of classical neuroscience and emergent complexity. In the end, the argument from Occam's razor is a call for intellectual humility and caution. The quantum mind hypothesis, for all its intellectual allure and creative brilliance, looks to many like a bridge too far, a speculative leap across a chasm without sufficient evidence to support its pillars. Despite the heavy skepticism, dedicated researchers are not just philosophizing. They are actively trying to find experimental evidence to support or refute quantum mind theories. One of the most direct lines of inquiry focuses on the central claim of the Occam theory, that microtubules within neurons can sustain quantum vibrations. A key prediction of Occam is that microtubules should resonate at specific frequencies when stimulated, much like a guitar string vibrates when plucked. In recent years, scientists at institutions like the National Institute for Materials Science in Japan and the University of Central Florida have conducted experiments to look for these resonances. Using techniques like laser light scattering and computer simulations, they have reported finding evidence of vibrations in isolated microtubules that do indeed fall within this predicted frequency range. This discovery, while preliminary, offers a tantalizing piece of evidence. Another fascinating avenue for testing quantum mind theories comes from the field of anesthesiology. Hameroff and Penrose argue that anesthetic molecules work by inhibiting the quantum computations within microtubules, effectively turning off the quantum switch. On the flip side, some researchers are now looking at psychedelic substances as another potential window into the brain's quantum mechanics. These molecules have a specific structure that allows them to bind to serotonin receptors, which influence microtubule stability and function. By studying how chemicals can turn off, turn on, or alter our experience, researchers hope to reverse engineer the fundamental mechanism of consciousness, potentially revealing a quantum switch at its very core. If it were ever proven that consciousness is fundamentally a quantum phenomenon, the discovery would represent far more than just a breakthrough in neuroscience. It would trigger a seismic shift in our entire scientific worldview, a revolution on par with those initiated by Copernicus, Newton, or Einstein. For centuries, science has operated under a materialist framework, viewing the universe as an objective mechanical system in which consciousness is, at best, a curious and accidental byproduct of complex matter. A quantum mind would shatter this foundation. It would imply that mind is not an afterthought of the universe, but is woven into its most fundamental fabric. This could lead to a form of panpsychism, the ancient idea that consciousness, or at least a proto-conscious element, is a universal feature. Beyond the philosophical upheaval, the confirmation of a quantum basis for consciousness would unleash a technological revolution, particularly in the fields of medicine and artificial intelligence. In medicine, understanding the precise quantum mechanism of consciousness could lead to incredible new treatments for neurological and psychiatric disorders. In the realm of artificial intelligence, the impact would be equally transformative. If consciousness is not computable in the classical sense, then no amount of processing power in a silicon-based computer could ever achieve it. A quantum mind would mean that the only path to creating a truly conscious machine would be to build a quantum computer that could replicate the specific physical processes that occur in the brain. This would raise a host of new and profound ethical dilemmas. If we could build a machine that harnesses the same quantum principles as a human brain, would it be conscious? The creation of a conscious quantum AI would force us to confront the deepest questions about the nature of personhood. We stand at a fascinating and humbling crossroads in the scientific quest to understand our own minds. The journey into the quantum consciousness hypothesis has taken us from the vast subjective universe of our inner experience to the bizarre, probabilistic realm of the subatomic. The central debate hinges on a single critical question: can the warm, wet, chaotic environment of the brain support the delicate quantum phenomena required for these theories to work? On one side, skeptics armed with the formidable problem of decoherence and the success of classical neuroscience argue that it is a physical and biological impossibility. On the other side, proponents point to the growing field of quantum biology as proof that nature has already mastered the art of using quantum mechanics in warm, wet systems. From the flawless efficiency of photosynthesis to the magnetic compass in a robin's eye, life seems to have found ways to harness the power of the quantum world. Ultimately, we are left with more questions than answers. The evidence remains inconclusive, a collection of tantalizing clues, strong counter-arguments, and a vast unexplored territory in between. What is clear is that the quantum mind debate, regardless of its ultimate outcome, serves a vital purpose. It forces us to confront the limitations of our current models and to ask bigger, more profound questions about the nature of reality, the definition of life, and the physical basis for our own existence. This enduring quest, this passionate search for the origins of the self, is one of the noblest endeavors of science. It requires us to be both rigorously skeptical and radically open-minded. It reminds us that there are still vast uncharted territories on the map of human knowledge. Whether the answer lies in the predictable dance of neurons or the spooky action of quantum particles, the pursuit itself is what matters. It is a reflection of our own conscious minds reaching out to understand their own nature. The ultimate expression of the universe turning back to look at itself, filled with wonder and an insatiable desire to know.